Photoshop. Surely.
Yeah.
All right. Well, my name is Kuhl, and I work here at Indatus. Tonight I'm going to be talking a little bit about queues, kind of setting up for kind of like a queues 101, and then Damien's going to give a talk diving further into high availability and some other more detailed stuff. So queues. How many of you guys are using queues now or have used them at some time in the past? Show of hands. Okay, cool. So with queues, you want to use them. The big benefit they add to your application is you can use them to delegate work to a background process so as not to interrupt the flow of the application. So a good example of that, which just went away, which is a use case that we have here at Indatus, is uploading CSVs to import content. A CSV import may take a minute, 2 minutes, depending on how much content you upload. And so that's not something we want the user to click submit and sit there and stare at for the duration of that minute. We want them to go on and do other things while we chew on that CSV file in the background. Another good use case is for when work fails and you want it to retry several times. Laravel queues handle this natively, and I'll get a little bit more into that, but things like sending email is a good use case. So building for queues, to build for queues, there are kind of 3 steps you need to take. Step 1 is the ability, like the code that actually processes work on the queue. So on this picture on the left, there's a fire command, and it accepts a job in an array of data and uses the array of data has a company ID. It looks up the company and bootstraps a mandrel account and then deletes the job from the queue. So this, again, is a use case we have here at Indatus. The idea is we're going to hit mandrel's API in the background. So if any exceptions occur or anything like that, we might want to retry. Maybe request times out, their servers are down for a second. We don't want our user to experience that. So we'll code the implementation. Step 2 is create a IOC alias for that implementation class. I should have included this on the left side, but this class name is Bootstrap Mandrel. So on the right side, the app bind, we create accounts.bootstrapmandrel to the class accounts.bootstrapmandrel. And so then on step 3, when we push work to the queue, this tells Laravel, this is the name of my queue, which Laravel will look in the IOC container to resolve the class on how to handle that. So Laravel will resolve that out of the IOC container and then pass it the array of data. So in this case, it's an array with a company ID, which I can then process within the queue itself. Now, if create subaccount were to throw an exception, Laravel internally will put that work back on the queue and handle that for you. It will also, upon successful execution, if no exceptions are thrown, delete the job from the queue, assuming everything went through okay. That's its way of assuming. I'm not a big fan of that. I like to be able to see it, so that's why that's here. So if you're like me, on a side project, I'm probably not going to have queues. I'm going to build like, here we use actual queue servers, but at home, some weekend project I'm doing, I'm probably not going to use queue servers. And Laravel comes with several drivers out of the box. They're listed there, so like Beanstalk, SQS, Iron.io, and there's also a sync driver. And the sync driver doesn't require a queue server. It allows you to architect your application to use queues without actually having a dependency on queue servers. It's great for deving locally or prolonging the implementation of queue servers. So if you're at a workplace right now where you have a good use case for queue servers or the concept of queues and being able to retry that work, and you don't have the architecture in place yet, but you would like to one day, using the sync driver, you can go ahead and build your code to support that so that when the time comes that you do get a queue server and you do get that set up, you can take advantage of that. So using the sync driver here in this code sample, this is, probably should have given a little more context on this. This is within a controller where we create a user account and we're pushing this company ID to a queue so the account can be bootstrapped and then redirecting to the home. So when we're using the sync driver, all of that interaction with Mandrill's API is going to happen before the redirect. That entire life cycle of hitting their API, bootstrapping the account, getting the response, and us handling that response within the application, and then redirect home. In an environment where we're using queues, that work gets set off to the side to get processed by another instance of the application. So we don't have to wait. It doesn't matter how long Mandrill takes to respond. To the user, the process is seamless. They just get redirected to the home screen. So for Laravel's, that's a little blurry. Well, maybe it'll clear up, maybe it won't. So Laravel comes with a lot of artisan commands that allow you to manage the queue. And they're listed there with their descriptions. Laravel's queue listen is the only one I'm going to talk a little more about. It watches for new work in the queue. So the idea is, if you are using a queue server, you need to have some process that is looking for work that's on the queue, and then when work comes in, it'll run it, it'll execute it. And so queue listen is Laravel's way of doing that. When it does detect new work, it essentially spawns a queue work artisan command, which is the last one there, which will process that work. So in the example I gave, in this fire command over here, queue work will execute this. It will pass the company ID in and do the actual work. With using queue listen, it is a good idea, and the Laravel docs reference this, to use process monitoring similar to supervisor to make sure it's always running. Otherwise, you might have all of your queue servers running, or sorry, you might have all of your application deployed thinking everything's working great, but these processes and these tasks that are queuing up never get executed because there's no process looking for more work. So two things that were kind of new to me that I've discovered recently is, one, I've never used queues until I started working here, and it was kind of a new concept to think that work may not be processed immediately because I'm used to doing everything at runtime. So, when the user hits submit, I'm importing the CSV, I'm sending the email, whatever happens. If that work gets queued, it may take 3 minutes for something to happen because depending on what else is running in the queue, if your job gets thrown on the bottom of the queue, it may take a little time. So you kind of have to think differently about it, like, and handle that user experience accordingly, that they may not get the email for a few minutes. And also, so for here at Indatus, we were implementing with Redis, and we had a big gotcha that kind of gave us a big headache, was a big headache for us. Within Laravel's Redis driver for queues, there's an internal expire time. You do not have this, to my knowledge, with Iron.io or any of the other jars. And if a job takes longer than this expire time, which defaults to 60 seconds, the queue will release that job back and another worker will pick it up. So if you have 4 items queued that take 3 minutes to run, after 60 seconds of that first job processing, that job gets released back into the queue even if it's still being worked. and it's a bit problematic. I don't really understand why it's there, but it is specific to the Redis driver. So something to be aware of if you're implementing with Redis. And that's all I got. So that's the rundown on queues. Damien?
Olofgard, O-L-O-F-G-U-A-R-D.
Scary message. He's here. No worries.
Oh, I was thinking I was going to have two different screens to work on here and had speaker notes over here, but that's all right. Back up real quick, got this way open. Okay, so I'm Damien Russell. I actually work here in Datus as well. Started here about a year ago. Tonight I'm here to talk to you about Laravel queues and high availability. I've been set the stage a little bit, and we've got a little bit of basic knowledge of queuing in Laravel. We're going to dig into high availability, though some of you may not know what that is. I will get to that in a minute. The reason for this talk was that I was recently tasked with integrating high availability queuing in an application we're building internally here at Zip Digital, or at the application is called Zip Digital. But before we can really dig into high availability, you got to make that choice to move away from sync. And there are a couple of options that you have available to you when you do this. But before you really start picking options, you're going to have to decide whether or not you want to manage that data, or if you want to pass that data off to someone else to manage. So in the instance that you're going to let someone else manage your data, there are services like Iron.io and Amazon SQS from Amazon Web Services. And essentially with these services, you could set up something like a simple push queue where when I do a queue push, those jobs get sent off to this third-party service, and then they can hit me back saying that this job is ready to be processed. I could also set it up in a way that when I push those jobs off to those queues, that they'll just set on those services until my application says give me the next job with queue listen or queue work has been mentioned. So those are two options if you're going to let someone else manage your data. But maybe you want to manage your own data. And in this case, Laravel supports Beanstalk and Redis. Redis is what I really want to dig into tonight with you. But before we get into that, I'll talk a little bit about Beanstalk just so you know more about that other option. Couldn't find a real image of Beanstalk except for the text that's on their webpage. So here's Beanstalk. But it's essentially just a simple queue service. It's going to live in memory and just act as a container for your jobs. You're going to have to set this up on your own hardware. But it's not going to do anything with those jobs. You're going to have to call queue listen or queue work and have supervisor or something, some other service, ensuring that those are always running. But that's Beanstalk. And now we can dig a little bit more into the meat of the talk, Redis. So what is Redis? Well, Redis stands for a remote dictionary server and is essentially just an advanced key value store or cache. It also works in memory just like Beanstalk, but it's not just for queuing. It has a lot of additional functionality built into it like transactions, pub sub, keys with limited time to live, automatic failover. And keep in mind, this is a standalone Redis instance that I'm talking about at this point. But if we started to spin up a bunch of instances of Redis and interconnect those, this would be a Redis cluster. And if we have these multiple instances that are interconnected, we get some neat functionality, though it is important to note that Redis cluster is still in beta. But with it, you can automatically split your data across nodes, your data set across nodes, and you also have the ability to continue operations when some of your nodes may be failing or unable to communicate with other nodes in your cluster. And I realize that's a pretty rough and dirty explanation of a cluster, but if you want some more information on that, I've included some links here. It should be up on the web somewhere after this, so you can view the slides and check those out. Those are 3 that I found pretty helpful when trying to understand clustering. So that's a Redis cluster. What about Redis and high availability? Well, high availability essentially is a characteristic of a system or a component of a system that is continuously operational for an exceptionally long amount of time. With high availability in Redis, you're going to want to dig in and learn more about Redis Sentinel. Redis Sentinel. Again, no image of Sentinel for Redis, so Sentinel. So Sentinel is a way for you to manage your Redis instances by performing 4 actions. That includes monitoring, so monitoring all the instances of your Redis masters and slaves. And if for some reason one of those goes down, it has the ability to notify you via HipChat or some notification out to your sysadmins via some API. And on top of that, it will start an automatic failover process if that does occur. And the way this works is you'll have Sentinel instances and Redis instances. Sentinel monitors Redis for you, and if one of your masters goes down, the Sentinel Council will get together and decide who should be the new master. And not a single instance of Sentinel is going to be able to promote a new master. It has to have approval from another instance, so you can't have some failing Sentinel instance to promote a new master. And the final thing is it acts as a configuration provider. And essentially what that means is anytime I need to know who master is, I reach out and I talk with Sentinel instead of trying to just connect to Redis. And Redis or Sentinel will tell me who the Redis instance, what Redis instance is currently master, and give me the IP address and the port for that. So that's a little bit about availability. But what does this really mean for Laravel and Redis? What do I get when I use these 2 things together? Well, as it turns out of the box, Laravel supports the full range of Redis commands that you can find on the Redis IO page under the /commands. There's a pretty big list there, and you do have the ability to execute all of these on your Redis instances. The only thing you need is a connection to Redis. So you could get your default connection with Redis connection or specify an exact connection to obtain that. And then once you have your instance, you can just start executing any of the commands on that instance that you find in that list. So set, delete, lrange, all of those things. If you don't want to instantiate an instance, you can use static methods to perform the same commands. And there's actually another way, another syntax for calling those commands. You just call this command method, passing the command you're trying to pass off to Redis. So it's actually not all that you get with Laravel and Redis. It goes beyond that. Redis has Laravel has 3 drivers for Redis, one for caching, sessions, and queuing. And how does all this tie into clustering and high availability? Do you still have the ability to use a Redis cluster in Laravel right out of the box? You actually do. That's one of the things that makes Laravel so neat. Is right out of the box it supports this thing that's still in beta. It's pretty cutting edge in my opinion. It's one of the reasons I think it's awesome. But what does that mean for Redis Sentinel high availability with Laravel? Turns out you cannot do this out of the box, which was a huge disappointment when I initially started working on this. It was not a good thing, but turns out that I have a solution, at least now. So this is actually a package. It's called Laravel PS Redis. It's up under the Indata's GitHub page. It's a pretty simple package, pretty simple to set up, and you can install it with Composer. Just install it, configure it, add the service provider. You can now communicate with a highly available instance of Redis. But really, how does that work? In order for me to describe that, we have to dig into the Redis service provider that's currently in place in Laravel. And you'll notice I've got the service provider pulled up here, and the register method there's only a single binding into the IOC container. As far as Redis goes, it binds a new instance of the Redis database to the container as Redis. So anytime an instance of Redis is resolved out of that container, it's looking for a new instance of the database. For instance, the Redis queue class here in Laravel under the Illuminate namespace, you can see in the constructor there that the Redis database is being resolved out of the container there. So anytime I resolve a connection, if we go back for a second, you note that in the constructor there, in that binding, the new database app config, it's pulling the values for your Redis instance out of a static config file. So when we talk about Sentinel and them electing a new master, this is clearly going to be a problem. So in order for us to get around that, we need to be able to communicate with Sentinel before creating that binding. And that's essentially what my package does. It utilizes, it's going to talk to Redis first by utilizing this Spark Central PS Redis package, which is essentially just a simple Sentinel wrapper for PHP Redis clients. And it allows us to reach out, find out who master is, grab the IP address and port for that, and then create our binding in the IOC container for Redis. So anytime our Redis queue asks for a new instance of the database, it's going to have the up-to-date master location. And the package provider that is in place. And actually, if you visit maybe not. One of the things that I tell you in the README there on the GitHub page is that you need to remove the Redis service provider and replace it with this new here, comment it out or remove it, completely your choice. Yeah, so that's pretty much all I've got. If you want to learn a little bit more about the package, feel free to visit the Indata's GitHub page. As I said, it's pretty simple to set up. The README should get you through it. This is what your config file is going to look like. You just need to provide it the connections for your Sentinel instances, and after you've added that service provider, everything should be taken care of from there. It is compatible with Laravel 4 and Laravel 5, and the Laravel 4 instance is slightly different, only because Laravel 4 has an older version of Redis. And the package that my package is built on top of requires 1.0. So if you're going to use it for Laravel 4, you'll have to include this little script here in your composer file, or this little snippet here, which will pull a forked version of that PS Redis package to include an older version of Redis. But if it's Laravel 5, simply composer install, you're good to go. I think that's all I've got. It was a little bit of a pain to get it set up in the sense that I needed to connect to Sentinel at first in order to communicate and push the master for the so,
Can you talk a little bit about the difference between Redis cluster and Sentinel, and kind of tell people about how like master election works and stuff in Sentinel and why that's different?
Well, with Sentinel, Sentinel is the coordinator. I mean, the Sentinel Council will communicate before electing a new master. As far as the master election and clustering, I'm not completely clear on how that process works, to be honest. I don't know the answer to that right now. It's not as far as clustering goes. The Sentinel piece, I understand, using that more.
Is Redis, is that like a distributed database, or because I know you said it had different masters, so like Sentinel would connect it to whoever was the master at the time. It made it seem like there was like multiple database instances.
Really, Sentinel or Redis is something that you're going to install on your own server. You may set it up as like a server on its own. In our scenario, we actually have a server that has Redis on it and also runs our workers as well. You may have servers that are dedicated to Redis, and then workers runs servers that will communicate with Redis servers.
Kind of follow-up question. So is it like, so is it like you have a database and then you have your Redis workers, and then they're accessing data and like accessing against the queue of work that's going to do more like that.
So Redis would just be like a container for my jobs that I push in. I have workers which are separate from my application that are going to communicate with Redis and say, what's in your queue? All right, I'm pulling this off of your queue, so put this in a reserved space for this time, and Redis will move it into a reserved space for the queue so no other worker can pull it off. And it will stay there until either it comes out and is released back onto the queue or until I delete the job or maybe back on. So it's kind of separate. The database part of that would be utilized inside my application.
Well, Redis itself is considered to be a data.
Yeah, I mean, it's a story.
The past, it's doing.
Yes, well, Laravel handles all the magic of creating that as a job inside Redis. Essentially, once it makes it at Redis, it's got some key value stored inside Redis. And when I pull the job off, I get the value from it. Which will have the ID for the job that I'm trying to run, or the ID for whatever I need.
Redis is that you guys store to manage the data that goes into the queue, but as far as actually like performing the job and actions within it, that's all Laravel. It's all your application.
Yeah.
So Redis is just kind of like the back end, if you will, of our queue. How did you deal with the automatic timeout going back into queues?
Redis had we can kick it back into the queue, so I mean that seems like you would be part of the way through processing that job, and then it would go back on, and then
It actually took a little bit of digging, but you can set an expire time config that will override that. That was not clear in the documentation like that, but if you dig into the source code, it looks like it looks for config value and then defaults to the 60 seconds to be done at that.
So we did like we turned it up far beyond what we would expect in our job.
but it still seems like in certain situations it would.
Yeah.
We found it because we had we expected so like the CSV import example, or sending out messages. We expected, let's say, 10 messages to try to, let's say 10,000 messages to get sent, and we were seeing 17,000 messages. How that happened, and what we found out was that a queue was getting executed, the queue work was getting executed, and then the expired time got put back on the queue. But the way that it worked, it didn't kill the process that was already executed, so then put it back on and started it again. So that's why it ended up
More questions?
Is there you have the way for the to communicate back to the main process with that?
Well, generally in the two classes that we defined, the requirement is showed you. Generally at the end of that, I'm going to release that job off, so I don't have to worry about it. I'll say, hey, Redis, I'm done. I did this whole job.
I didn't follow. You're going to who's going to release the process?
Are you trying to notify end users or job stuff?
No.
Oh, okay. It really just depends on how you structure your code, I guess.
Kind of up to the application.
Yeah.
You may or may not want to change it.
What type of job?
You need to do it, don't do it.
Is there
That's pretty good thought. That may be the way that I would go about it. I would fire off some events and the process completed with the object that with the result of that or something.
This will only live in the website.
It depends on what you want to do. So if you want to send an email in that file, you must be
Cue Inception.
I want to get back to I want to sending an email.
okay.
But for your example, though, of getting back to the main process, the idea of the queue is that you can execute the job outside of the main process. So there would have to be some kind of like socket communication or something like that to say, this is pending.
Like a quick and dirty way would probably just be to mark some kind of, thing like existing and keep going.
Yeah.
And then the next page refresh, it would see that that's done. That way, yeah, that's, I mean, you can pull forward and do other things. That's probably a great way. If you have somewhere you would want this process, and do that back.
Okay, I mean, you would, in this day and age, you would expect to be able to manipulate something.
Right. The thing, that's what Jason was saying, is that you, in your user interface, you would say, execute this job, that asynchronously puts it to a queue, and you see some kind of spinning wheel or something like that. And it's, that is basically that pull in the database saying, what's the status, pending, and the job executes through the queue, and when the queue is complete, it writes back into the database and says it's done, and your process is pending, and it says, oh, now it's updated, and says it's pending.
But if you want to send an email, I mean, you might just send this.
Your sarcastic comment is loading. When can we expect it? Tomorrow.
Yeah, if you wanted a real time update, I don't think you could do it. Working on it. It's only been an application for the user.
We use Ritter pop-ups in our application. Yeah, it looks like groundhog. So we would need to find that out. But use that, all that.
Probably is, yeah.
I'm not sure off the top of my head.
I'm being funny, but yeah, it's true. It's a number that Laravel did a good job.
So if you read it,
Yeah.
you would see that. But Laravel came up with that.
It'd be like a special.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, if you examine the queues, it's got a, I'm sure there's a specific key for that piece of information in Redis. But if you look at the data in that queue value, it's going to have a specific job ID. I've seen that as a sign up.
It's actually really interesting the way Laravel actually, like, Redis itself actually has few services built into it, but that's not the way Laravel uses it. Laravel uses it as like a completely dumb memory store, and yes, key value pairs inside of it that get read out by the keys. So it's not, Laravel is doing everything. Like Redis is nothing. Yeah, it's basically just a data record set that gets stacked. It's popped off. But yeah, but yeah, it's not anything fancy.
Two questions. What was the name of that tool that you guys were using for digging around in Redis? Was it Redis Manager?
It's Arduino on the machine.
It's Redis desktop.
Yeah.
Redis Desktop Manager. Okay, just want to make sure. That's a very nice, helpful tool. The other question was, what other options did you see for high availability queuing?
Honestly, we kind of stopped at what was available in the big file, or at least I did. When I looked into those things, Silas run for Redis and our GitHub stack. I kind of come on board with that soon. That was that, right?
Sorry, he does indeed. Does anybody have any other answers to that? I was curious if you looked at high availability queuing.
Yeah, I looked into that a little bit because initially we were looking at Beanstalk, and Beanstalk is not highly available.
Yeah.
And Redis, if you want to host your own, is one of the only ones that I've seen. If you just want like queuing and not getting into like message bus type stuff. Now like SQS or I'm sure they're highly available, but yeah, you can take one and use Redis. Yeah.
Not so much a question. I just wanted to kind of go back to something that I mentioned earlier. Like if you're building you want to architect with this concept of queues, but you don't want to set up a queue within that same basically architect your application reading, but they're just going to run on in real time. But then that would allow your application to grow later. So it's a good way to mess around with like a queue push and so forth inside of Laravel, but not really have to have a queue. So check out that sync thing to mess around and put some stuff on the queue inside the code just to see how it works. It's actually really cool configuration. This is just, it doesn't process. No, it doesn't. It just runs it in one. It's just like your code was wherever you push, it's just synchronous. It'll like fire like a microphone. That's the whole point. What they call it. So it's slow down. No, I mean, it would run the same as if you wrote that code in one, but you're able to use like the queue beside and push things onto the queue. That doesn't really exist. It just takes like a response and function. But it's a cool way to architect your application. The stuff that you really want to push on the queue. Yeah, it might. So those cheap way to do that.
So theoretically, in the contract, you just switch the driver over to that.
Exactly.
Single function instead of that story.
You have the architecture of queues, but you don't really have queues. Right. You kind of build your app in a way that's fun way to play around with. So that's something like that.
Let's say you don't have a DevOps team. So that way is.
You guys know that the serialization of complex objects is the same for the same driver as it is for other stuff? That you might get burned if you were like to the code.
When I was some stuff at home one day, when we were looking remote on the snow days, I pushed something on the queue and then I had to pull it out, and I ran into that when I couldn't call back the eloquent methods on it because it couldn't be serialized. So yes, I do think it operates just like
So literally is.
Again, it forces you to use that architecture.
Yeah.
You can build your app with the concept of queues, but do it cheap without actually having to have it.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I think you're right.
So to Jason's point, because like you can't assume, like the reason in the example I showed was an array, the company will be, you don't want to pass that kind of instance. It's going to be serialized, and then another instance of the application is going to actually do the work. So it's better to pass as little data as possible to complete the work. So everything runs as fast as you can, you don't query things on.
And also, it's an in-memory service. So you don't have to dock that time. Just an ID, a lot longer than in-memory has.
So if you're playing with queues and you get some kind of errors that have to do with superclosure, which is a dependency that Laravel brings in, that can't deserialize a complex object, you know you're probably passing something in closure that you shouldn't do. That's me on that.
Any questions?
I was passing it on.
Thank you guys.
Great talk, man. Thank you.